Is any oil and gas people in the room? I know we had some yesterday, a couple. So there's a lot of acronyms, acronym soup, so we'll go through those, and I apologize that I may throw some at you and didn't do the best explaining it, so we'll try to get through that. But to start off, to kind of echo what Nate was saying, is want to challenge you right off and challenge this is the challenge we threw to the oil and gas companies. So there's, if you remember back to the Gulf War, and there were nearly 700 wells that were on fire. And if you think and you learn about the story, it was anticipated with current processes that it would take about 3 years to extinguish 700 wells. Not acceptable for environment or current processes, so what was the answer? The answer actually was put forth by the Hungarian firefighters. It's a tank with 2 MiG-21 engines. They rolled it up to the fire and blew it out, right? So it's not new technology, but it's a creative way of thinking. So it dovetails, we were talking about metaphors, and it does right into the challenges that we're having in oil and gas. So the NTL regulations, which came out after the Gulf of Mexico incident, basically requires oil and gas companies, or better yet, recommends oil and gas companies that operate in deep water to have a common operating picture. Well, the regulations state it's a picture. Not extremely helpful. What does that mean? How does Esri leverage what we're currently doing to enable these oil and gas companies to have better situational awareness? Well, interestingly enough, internationally it's the same challenge. So there's an organization that sits underneath IPICA. It's called the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers. I'm lucky enough to sit on this board as a representative of Esri, and what we're doing is trying to marry global challenges that meet both these recommended requirements. Well, if we think about the challenge that we just referenced with the Gulf War in oil and gas, this is our current common operating picture. So leveraging what all the different things that we've talked about the last couple of days, fantastic discussions, well, these are the things that we talked to oil and gas companies about. And so we said, what if we leverage our current ArcGIS platform environment to give you fit-for-purpose views that allow you to access real-time information to make better decisions? So they're not static maps. They're informational products that we can leverage anytime, anywhere, and from any device. So the story that I want to take you through is a classic example of how oil and gas companies are leveraging the ArcGIS platform to do this type of work. And then my colleague Raphael, we're going to take this after we explain the story and show you maybe a few workflows that could be considered. So a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to expand the current definition of what a COP is. It's really multiple pictures that support the work that you're doing. But by no means are we suggesting that there's more than one authoritative view. There is only one authoritative view. And if you think back at some of the Gulf of Mexico incident, there was estimated that there were 43 COPs, meaning which authoritative view am I looking at? Is yours right? Is my right? Is this information correct? So we're leveraging the platform that we have here at Esri to offer fit-for-purpose views of authoritative information. We're suggesting that we have tools and procedures that allow you to do workflow analytics that answer the common questions and problems that you experience as oil and gas professionals. And Nate and I had an interesting discussion before this. I'm giving you an oil and gas example, but there's no difference as it pertains to any other industry. So I hope as we go through this and I show you these examples, that it might resonate in the industry that you sit in and say, I could do the same thing. Other things that it does that we think is critical is makes that authoritative content. So there were some really different and difficult decisions made out of the incident based on inaccurate information. So how can we fix that solution? We think the platform to access this information from one single platform makes this acceptable. Other things that we referenced earlier, which is anytime, anywhere, from any device. So imagine to be able to communicate with your field workers and have a better understanding, getting pictures, and where's boom placement, accuracy of resources, be able to act on that information and to coordinate and communicate and share that information. So we saw in Jack's slides the architecture that Esri's put forth, and we're happy to acknowledge that the OGP has looked upon this technology and this platform as the architecture for best practices for oil and gas companies to leverage in any type of incident. So now we're going to get into what did they do and how did they do it, and maybe these are some things to think about. So first of all, there's an organization called Marine Well Containment. You may have not heard of them. They support pretty much the 10 largest oil and gas companies in Gulf of Mexico. Their whole remit is to provide a capping stack. So if you have an incident, they stand up day 1 and day 2 and respond with that capping stack and roll into your organization. Approximately 2.5 years ago, the president ordered Marine Well Containment and one of the large oil and gas companies to actually respond and to bring that capping stack, put it over a simulated well, and show that they can respond. So here's their ArcGIS Online that they stood up. And what it did is it allowed communication between the government, the general public, Marine Well Containment, and for this drill, in this scenario, Shell was on the hook for the drill. So what did they do? They had to get the capping stack offshore, put it on a vessel, run the vessel out 5 days, drop the capping stack. The audible was called that we lost pressure. How do we react? Previously to having any type of ArcGIS platform for them to service, the government, Marine Well Containment was going to strategically send individuals to different locations throughout the US to show data as required. So now they have a fixed Silverlight viewer that only shows certain information. It's a similar black box, if you will. So as the government says, show me this data, they can't. So we set up a named user access, allowed the government to come in to look at the information that they required, and then have Shell communicate back and forth. Well, where did they get all this data? Well, interestingly enough, Shell produced a lot of their information directly off ArcGIS Online in the free data. So the government asked and required certain information, and they went out to their own infrastructure and got ArcGIS Online data, free data, maybe premium content, and then on a small portion, brought in their own proprietary information, represented it back to the government. Where did we take this? So we thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if we started to deliver the same common message to our partners? What if our partners could leverage this same platform and deliver information directly into that? So as we began to learn and hear of best practices and lessons learned from the incident, one of the things that we recognize is that nearly every oil and gas company responded to that incident. So there are people from the North Sea that came over, there were boots on the ground that helped in the incident command. Well, if they're familiar with a base map, maybe this is the one that they were leveraging. Well, the North Sea guy is not familiar with Gulf of Mexico, this wasn't too descriptive. So at Esri, what could we offer up to the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers as a standard? So our cartographers actually took information from BOEM and represented it back in a cartographically sound web map. So what does this mean is if you come into Gulf of Mexico or North Sea or off the coast of Africa, that you can expect to see standard symbology sets, reference layers that give you general context. The whole idea being, let's respond quicker, better, and with more clarity. Here's the example of the second drill that the president ordered. It was a year later, and we were lucky enough to be one of 2 organizations to participate in both of them. So this is really tailored to your large independents, not your super majors. But what you can see here is they're leveraging the base maps that we created and then integrate it with your incident command system, or the ICS. So you can see the planning P on the left-hand side, and that's their systematic approach to emergency management. But then they're taking the web maps and saying, I want to integrate and know where my branch, division, task force, and teams are. I want to know where my vessels are. I want to know where my resources at risk are. At the time that we did the Marine Well Containment exercise, operations dashboard was in beta. We had something in the range of less than 10 videos, but the videos showed from shore, from vessel, other real-time information. But what was actually transpiring was we couldn't figure out real-time where these things were. So the big joke that we had in the room as we're going through this exercise is the government would ask where the vessel is. And everybody would sit back and chuckle and say it's in Gulf of Mexico. What he's really asking, right, is where is that vessel based on the video, action it off the map or action off the video. So with our partners Oceaneering, this is their video. We took the telemetries off the video And now you can actually click on the map and launch the video, or click on the video and launch the map. The other thing that was quite transformational on this is, previous to using the platform, they were actually using the telemetry information. And how would they get this pressure information? They would take an ROV up to the capping stack and read from the video what the pressures were. Well, if you look in the right-hand screen, that top information is that telemetry. So it's been skimmed out, and that half moon actually shows you what the pressure is. So imagine when the government tells you you have an audible and your pressure's out of control, you recognize this, and you're aware, and you may take those steps before it's even brought to your attention. Other things that the oil and gas companies have begun to leverage is just the core functionality of GIS. You know, GIS has time enablement, and we understand that in an event, time is critical. So in this example, Drew referenced, I live in Houston. I actually live south of Houston, off the coast, and my wife, who's a native Texan, has said for years that we always have tar on our beaches. So interestingly enough, when the incident happened, there's a lot of neighbors that said, I got oil and gas oil on my beaches. Well, this map authoritatively said, not my oil. So you could look at impact. We could suggest, based on trajectories, what's the impact to wildlife, where's the next resources, what do I do to take better steps to accommodate for this? Interestingly enough, this was also used, if you look down at the date, by the oil and gas company to say what they did when they did it. So you can actually go back and say, at certain date, deployed X amount of resources, did this. Obviously, we talked about the data enrichment services, a lot of information that comes through the platform. Jack referenced it yesterday, and we have partners here today that are using the platform. And here's an example, right, of taking that information, looking at demographics and saying, what's the impact? So this example shows businesses, amount employed, dollars impacted. Other things that oil and gas companies are starting to do is they're starting to track over time what their impact is on a certain area. So meaning, what do we do based on environmental impacts? What have we done with reclamation? And so they're using this type of viewer, hopefully in a positive fashion, to better communicate to stakeholders in general, the public. So we're about to get into some confusing talk here about templates. So when we talked about the industry standard web map templates, those are being used as general context information. What I have on the screen here, these are called web app templates. So they're configurable templates that give you a set of functionality to allow you to action off your data. So a template again, but this is a web template. So this one specifically is used by a lot of our oil and gas executives not familiar with general GIS. They need a zoom in, they need a zoom out, they need an identify tool. They feel comfortable in this, they can action off it, it's authoritative information, but it sits within their enterprise GIS platform. So it's fantastic to hear these guys starting to use a viewer. They may not know the word GIS, but now they're using this information that's authoritative and making better decisions. Using the same template we took, and this one's vessel availability. So we heard from Exact Earth and their AIS information and oceaneering. And imagine being able to look at where those vessels are and quickly make a determination. So this example has your IMO vessels, in what area and what's their sum, and you can do surface over ground speed and get a better understanding of, within this area, where are my resources? Just out-of-the-box web applications that action off your data. Another one, which I'm real proud to talk about today, is it should be available soon. In the oil and gas world, we work off the business continuity management model of PAIR, or most of them do. People, environment, assets equal reputation. So a lot of these guys who do that emergency management process know that, but they don't necessarily or action off of GIS. So in this example, it has tabs on the bottom, and you step through it. So imagine if you have an incident. First thing you're going to say, what are my people impact, right? That could be a tab. What's my impact on the environment? You can bring environmental sensitive areas, leverage very valuable content. Then where are my assets or my resources at risk? And then you can bring in a social media impact and say, what are they saying about this? And then you can actually leverage some of that information to better respond. So this one will be available soon, but already we're using it in a lot of oil and gas drills to get that quick understanding. If you're familiar with any of these drills that are happening, and it's just to show that they can respond, this information that we have on the screen could take 6 hours to these guys to make the calls, to figure out the vessels, where the resources. With a template like this, you can step through the process in a few seconds and have an answer. I think it's really transformational. I hope you guys will take a look at it soon. Another example, in the North Sea, they're looking at the production information. So you do have an incident. You're looking at if it's producing and when it's producing, and then imagine bringing in all your SAP information and say, here's the actual cost to determine what type of resources you need to put at this. Then just to follow up on some of the web applications and work, this is the actual SIMOPS room of an oil and gas company that works off the coast of North Africa. And what they had to do is determine that they could get a clean capping stack seal. So they brought in rich bathymetric data, and then they used application. And what Jack talked about yesterday was, say, global elevations, and have an understanding of what that is. And so here's a good example of out-of-the-box leveraging premium content to do some analysis. So what I want to take a break right now, and then I want to jump into the actual software, and I want to show you something. So we heard from Kelly of RPS ASA yesterday, really great talk. And we're not on the screen. Fantastic. So we've been working with them to what we think transform the way oil and gas companies are responding to incidents. So together we built a widget, and it's a tool basically that allows and leverages the platform to look at their information. So in this example, you can actually go 3 days out and look at the weather. And so I've been told through RPS that it does an envelope model of the 3-day forecast and looks at that. You can pick the time of, say, the incident and 9:30 a.m. And you can pick duration. So this is all looking at worst case discharge, right? And these are what we're expecting. So you could say it's 4 hours. You can pick your type of chemical, Gulf of Mexico sweet crude. You pick your type of units. I work in Gulf of Mexico, and I'm American, so I pick barrels, of course, and then you could name it. And then you simply locate where this incident is, and it's going to go run out and hit their server and then create an output back in ArcGIS Online. So within a few seconds, I have an output that I can action off of. So what did it do? It went back to RPS ASA server. It looked at sea surface temperatures, wave heights, and wind speeds to give me an understanding of trajectories in this impact. So if we look at this output, and we can run through the time slider and see at what hour, at what time we expect these things to do. And if I take off my currents here, and I want to take off my particles, and I want to show thickness. And so what we see here on this thickness model is we're able to look at the science behind what that looks like in 2D. So I challenged Raphael and said, it looks like a relatively insignificant 2D surface impact. So Raphael, what's this look like in 3D? So we took this same information, and I want to flip it over to Raphael, and he's going to show you what this looks like in 3D, so we can make a determination is there a greater impact than what we think, and how do we leverage this scientific information in a new product?
Thanks, Matt. Can you guys see what I'm seeing? I'm 6. There we go. So, before we get started looking at RPS ASA's plume model, I want to give you a brief tour of a new product that's coming to the ArcGIS desktop family. This application is ArcGIS Pro. And as you can see, we've implemented the ribbon. Many of you have already started using the ribbon in other platforms. And what we've noticed is that the ribbon is a great way to navigate through complex software like ArcMap. It's a little bit of a different UI, but it should still feel familiar. We have our bookmarks, our base maps, and you can see we've got the ocean base map in there as well. And if you noticed, I'm actually leveraging that OGP template of the base map in ArcGIS Pro. I can use my selection tools. So we're confident that ArcGIS Pro will still feel familiar and allow you to be incredibly productive. If you remember at Kevin's demo, he was actually using ArcGIS Pro to run that new OpenDAP data tool. So within ArcGIS Pro, we've brought in all the toolboxes, or many of the tools that you're used to using in ArcMap, and we're excited to bring in new tools here to you in the future. Now, Dave showed an awesome example of raster function chains. In ArcGIS Pro, we also have these new raster function chains, and we have a new environment to start to build them that's very similar to the model builder environment. And we think that it's going to be easier for you to make those complex raster function chains. An exciting thing about Pro is that it's 64-bit and it's multi-threaded. So now, as you start to work with the application, it can be running geoprocessing on one thread, and you can continue to interact with the application on another. So let's zoom in to get some information here on the map. And notice how fast it draws. I'm curious about this one specific area right here on the map. And this gives us great context in 2D with the oceans base map. But what I really want to see is this area in 3D. So I'm going to open up another 3D pane, and I'm going to use my bookmarks and zoom to this specific location. And so now you can see I can have that same contextual information in 2D and in 3D, giving me better understanding of what these specific pipes might look like. And so now, as an oil and gas professional working in the pipeline industry, I might be curious about what's happening specifically right here so that I know when a blowout is going to take place or if that's a point of pressure. Now, we are here specifically to look at RPS-ASA's plume model, as Matt asked. So let's zoom over to their plume and see what that looks like in 3D. So you can see that we have our platform, we've got our Christmas tree, which is the well, and as I pan and zoom around, you can see how quickly that those particles update, and as we look at it in the water column, we can see that something's taking place. Part of that plume is going up to the surface, and part of it's still staying at the bottom. So we have a better understanding of how to respond to this event. Now, something that would be really exciting is to be able to see this in 3D and also be able to see the NetCDF data that we've seen as well. And so we're excited to be able to soon put in salinity data in there so that we can see how that would affect in there as well. I wasn't able to do that for this demo specifically, but hopefully we'll have something to show you soon. Thank you. Back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Raphael. So, as we flip back over, so one of the things that I wanted to show. So again, Nate and I had an interesting discussion beforehand, and this is, the challenge goes back out to you, the scientists, which is we just looked at this valuable information in a 2D and 3D sense. Imagine if we can bring in the salinity and the chlorophyll or the microorganism content on top of that. Make better decisions and action off this visual information that we just brought in. So we look forward to showing you that in future demos, but if you have that type of information, the call to action's out there. We're looking for it. We want to be able to action off it so that we can make these better decisions. So just a couple more things in closing. So these oil and gas companies have been really fantastic at saying, we think we can respond to a lot of things now. What they feel they're terrible at doing, and specifically marine well containment said it, is we're terrible at telling the general public what we're doing. So we leverage the out-of-the-box storytelling maps, allow them to tell their specific story and give them the public an actionable map. The other thing that they've really enjoyed is the ability to take all this information and use it on their mobile devices. So we're bringing in the OGP maps. We actually have a SCAT template for a collector, which means it's surface cleanup assessment teams. So as they're onshore doing cleanup, they can use the NOAA short form and actually put in the information in drop-downs, get accurate GPS locations and pictures. So the example that I have here, and referencing where I live, we actually ran from the last hurricane. It wasn't because that we were worried of the winds or the impact, but we were worried about going without electricity with a 9-month-old. So we got in the car, we went 28.2 miles in about 12 and a half hours. We took the storm in the car. I didn't even make it to downtown Houston. So if you remember back in the storm, more people died on the freeways than they actually did based on the storm. So what we have here is the information sharing it's a two-way communication from the employee back to the organization. I can say that I'm departing or I'm staying, and the organization, and I can do that based on information at my location. I can look at road closures, fueling stations, make this determination, check in, and my organization has whereabouts of where I am. Imagine if I stay put, and once that storm rolls through, the organization has information on me, and they can be the first ones to reach out and say, do you need a generator? Are you okay? What can we do for you? So the ability to do this two-way communication with out-of-the-box mobile is really important for these guys. Other things that I thought were really important that I wanted to quickly share with you is that the oil and gas companies, the executives that we work with, have really in-depth storyboards on these drills. Well, when they think about using a map, the data just magically appears for them. So we challenged them and said, it's not nearly that easy. Run through using PowerPoint and tell me what that storyboard is, and then build your map. So what this actually did for them is allowed them to see data gaps, right? We could build the maps using the Microsoft integration, and then they could actually see what data they had and what data they didn't have, so that as they're better responding and as they build out their global asset emergency management, they can leverage these tools that they're familiar with. Here, this is Tullow Oil, and they're leveraging the media maps to do that type of information. They absolutely, in an incident, like to do the drag and drop feature that's in Excel and say, where are my resources, where are my people? And then using the enterprise technology like in Excel that most people are familiar with, it gives them a comfort level to be able to access and build information products inside. The other thing that's really important is to be able to share that information. So a lot of these guys have this on their C drive. Using the platform, you can share it back out to the org and make some really better decisions. And then I just wanted to share with you, there's some lessons learned and learnings that are out there to be consumed. One of them was from the Helix well containment exercise that we referenced. And his presentation was pretty fantastic. This drill actually took a capping stack to the deepest pressures and temperatures that any capping stack or device has gone for an oil and gas company. But when I looked at his lessons learned, if you look at the third bullet, it was the common operating picture. And he went about what he did. And so it's a relatively simple, in terms of schematic, what he did. He looked at the subsurface, and they brought in his telemetry, and then he took it up to the surface and monitored his vessels. And he put it back into, and if you look at his final product is everything that we just showed you. It's out of the box Esri GIS platform. So it's really great to see these type of things and how they can better communicate with others. And then finally, I wanted to leave you with, we're doing these things on drills, but if you remember back about a year or so ago, there was an actual little blowout, a Hercules 256 blowout in Gulf of Mexico. U.S. Coast Guard, and at that time, Director Watson, they're actually looking at ArcGIS platform with integration of ICS. So it's fantastic to see the call to action between industry and oil and gas companies, and we hope that through these type of environments that we can help, and you can help us and say, hey, we can take it from what you're just doing and transform it more by putting scientific information. So I'm going to close it there, Drew, but the idea for everyone to consider is that these things are being done regardless of what industry, and hopefully we showed you some things that you might be able to take back and say, I can do that in my daily workflow.